Curious George, Lost and Found. It was the weekend, and George was excited. He and his friend had left the city for their country house. After a long drive, George was happy to arrive. He was looking forward to feeding the ducks. "Don't wander far, George," said the man with the yellow hat as their friend Mrs. Rankin drove up to say hello. But someone else had wandered off. Mrs. Rankin's chicks. George's friend offered to help find them. Meanwhile, George headed toward the river. At the river, George fed the ducks with his friend Jumpy Squirrel. They found a raft that let them get closer to their duck friends, so close that George felt just like a duck as he floated down the river. Uh-oh, the raft had drifted away from the shore. George enjoyed his trip down the river with all of his hungry duck friends, but Jumpy was worried. They were lost, just like the chicks. The path passed some crook trees and a big rock that looked like a duck. The big duck rock made the ducks quack and George smile, but Jumpy was too worried to sightsee. The sun was setting. How they were going to find their way back to the farm? When they reached a bend in the river, George and Jumpy spotted a silo. Hooray! It looked like the Rankins' farm. They waited until the raft neared the shore, then jumped off and headed toward the silo. But it wasn't the right farm. The Rankins' silo was red. They were still lost. They looked around. Nothing looked familiar except the big duck rock. It was a landmark. Maybe it would help them find their way home. George drew a map. He remembered the big duck rock, the crook trees, and the silo at the Rankins' farm. George also remembered that the sun set behind the red silo every night. George and Jumpy decided they should follow the sun. It will help them find their way back to the farm, especially if they look for other landmarks along the way. As George and Jumpy walked back to the farm, Jumpy bumped into their friends who were lost, the chicks. The chicks did not understand how to use landmarks to navigate, but they were happy to follow the squirrel and monkey back to the farm. At the farm, Mrs. Rankin and the man with the yellow hat were surprised when George and Jumpy showed up with the chicks in tow. "George, weren't you supposed to be feeding the ducks?" asked the man with the yellow hat. George tried to explain, but it was easier to let the chicks do all the squawking. The end.